हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम टू माय चैनल कोड व्यू एंड टॉक। और आज हम लोग इस वीडियो में स्प्रिंग बूट रिलेटेड क्वेश्चन डिस्कस करने वाले हैं। तो मेरे साथ इस वीडियो में दीपक है। हाय दीपक,
या है पीयूष।
कैसे हो?
हाँ, मैं ठीक हूँ, आप बताओ।
हाँ, मैं भी बढ़िया हूँ। तो हम लोग स्टार्ट करते हैं इस वीडियो को, और
हम्म,
वन बाय वन हम लोग स्प्रिंग बूट रिलेटेड क्वेश्चन डिस्कस करेंगे। तो पहला क्वेश्चन जो है वो व्हाट ऑल एनोटेशन डू वी यूज्ड इन स्प्रिंग बूट प्रोजेक्ट। So I will
या
ask this Deepak to answer these questions, and then I will also add on if it is needed. Yeah, Deepak, go ahead.
या या So basically, starting from Spring Boot application, there is very first annotation any Spring Boot developer come across. So that consists of three annotation, that is component scan, configuration, and enable auto configuration. And if anyone working with simple CRUD operations, then they must come across repository annotation at the repository services and controller and dash controller annotation. So before that, there is a POJO class. So we have to map that POJO to our database. So in there also, at the entity annotations are there, column annotations are there, table annotations are there. And yeah, these are the basic annotation. Any like a Spring Boot developer must know this.
Yeah, so
Any, yeah, whatever you want to add.
yeah, so you have already covered many of the annotations. So I'll just add a few annotations on that, like at the rate profile, at the rate bean. These are the few annotations which we use. At the rate value for reading value from the properties file. So these are the few more annotations we can use. So one should know all these annotations if you are preparing for Spring Boot interview. So the next question is one of the very important concept when we come to the Spring Boot questions, like what is the dependency injection?
Yeah. So basically, the big advantage of Spring Boot is the dependency injection itself only. There is, we can say it is like a revolution. So what happening in dependency injection is just like there will be class. So it should not be like directly coupled. So we should be loosely coupled. That class should be loosely coupled. For that purpose, dependency injection come into the picture. And basically, in our case, we have three type of dependency injection: fill dependency injection, setter dependency injection, and constructor dependency injection. So, what is your point of view about this?
Yeah, so you have rightly said that, Deepak, like what is dependency injection and what are type of the dependency injections. But on top of that, I would like to add, like we know like there are three type of dependency injection, right? But the recommended one is the constructor injection, because you can use like any one of them in order to get that dependency injection. But recommended is the constructor injection, so we should always follow the recommended one. So that I will add for this dependency injection, and this helps our application. Like dependency injection is one of the concept that is automatically handled by the Spring Boot project, and which helps us to make our project more loosely coupled, so that we can scale our project as and when it is needed. So for that purpose, dependency injection is very much important. So now let's move to the next questions. Some of the questions are going to be very theoretical, and in some of the questions we will be discussing in detail. So the next question which I have is like, what are the scopes in Spring Boot?
Yeah, Piyush. So basically, it consists of five scope. Whenever we are creating these, by default it is singleton. Then we can make it as prototype. We can make it as request, session, and application. These are the web type of annotations we have there for scope. And after that, one new scope is get introduced. That is WebSocket. So this kind of scope we have in our Spring Boot and applications.
Yeah, you are right. So the next question which I have is difference between REST controller and controller. Like we have two annotations, right, for defining the controller. So what is the difference between both of them?
Yeah, so basically this controller is consist of two annotations like controller plus response body. So it's written the like it's in our controller case it's written the view. There should be view and the view should be mapped with any theme leaf or any things we are using that should file should be present. Otherwise, it will give exception. But in case of the return can be JSON string, anything can be there in the REST controller. And basically, these are like both annotation are used for mapping our controller class. So yeah. So any things you want to add on top of this?
No, you have rightly said that as a REST controller is a combination of two annotations where controller is just one. So that's correct. Next question is like this question everyone should know if you are a Spring Boot developer, like how do we connect database from the Spring Boot applications?
Okay, yeah, please. Yeah, this is the hot questions, one of the hot questions. Every Spring Boot developer must have filled these questions. So yeah, so how do we connect the database from our Spring Boot? So basically, our dependency should be there in our POM XML. Whatever database we are using, for example, anyone using SQL, so that dependency should be there. And started JPA data JP dependency should be there. And in application.properties, we have to configure our database config settings, just like giving the password, URL, database URL, and driver class name. We have to give there. And some of the properties, like we have to set Hibernate properties, just like delegates, and these properties we have to do. And yeah, this is the basic things we can do
Yeah, you are
for.
right. So we should be adding the dependency in the pom.xml, and then you need to write all the configuration like username and other configuration in the application.properties file. And after that, you should be able to connect with the database. So we know like by default the Spring Boot application comes with the Tomcat server, right? But there are different other servers also which comes with the Spring Boot application. We can do that change. So like what are the other servers available, and how can we change if you want to run our application on other server other than Tomcat?
Yeah, Piyush, this is the also one of the important questions. So basically, other servers are Jetty and Underdog that comes with Spring Boot, and we can exclude our Tomcat server. We can include Jetty server or any server you want. So in our configuration pom.xml file, we will exclude and we will add the configuration for Jetty server. By default, the Tomcat server port is 8080.
Yeah, so the another question which comes to my mind here is we have a, as you said, Deepak, you by default it runs on 8080, right? But if you want to change the server port, how do we change that port in the Spring Boot application?
Yeah, so basically we usually change the port. There is a configuration, so we can server.port in our application file, and whatever port available port is there. So from that we will change.
Oh, all right, yeah, you are right. So, and the other thing, when we make any project in Spring Boot, right? So we want to have like we want to know the health check or any other when we, so when we develop any project in the Spring Boot and it is deployed in the production, we want to know about the health check and other related data, metadata about the project. So right, so therefore that
Yes,
purpose there is concept called Actuator, and
yes,
I would
yes.
like to know from you like what is Actuator and how it helps to know the metadata about the application in prod environment.
Yeah, so basically Actuator is the production ready application or starter package it's provided by Spring Boot. So just we have to, for configuration part, just we have to exclude it in our pom.xml, and in application.properties, we have to like what endpoint should be excluded or included. So that should be, if we make it a start, then it should, every endpoint, it should exclude or include whatever is we mention in there, a key value pair. And basically it gives every information about our Spring beans, how many beans is get created, and the health of the our applications and health metrics is keep, and dumping is like garbage collector, which is garbage collector and how is working, and track of all the things it will give. It is just like a dashboard. We can it's I think it's running on 1110. I forgot the like default it's but we can get it from there. Then it's like a dashboard where our production ready features will be get added of our application.
Yeah, you are right. And there is a annotation called at the rate profile in Spring Boot, right? So this annotation is used for what purpose? Would you like to describe about the at the rate profile annotation?
Yeah, Piyush. So basically, as we know, in development phase, we have access to our dev environment only. But when it's come to pilot environment, when it's come to UAT environment or QA environment, so they are basically they are in depending upon organization, its environment is get changed. So for our case, we have the database configuration for dev environment. So we whenever we have to do integration testing or analytics testing, so we will put our application on dev environment. So how it perform there. So so profiling is just like a configuration things. So different environment is get configured according to the what profile we have mentioned there.
Yeah, you are right. I would like to add here a few points on top of that. Whatever you said is completely correct. As you said that the red profile annotation is for the profiling when we have a multiple environment, right? When we develop any software, we have a different stages. Like we have a dev environment, we have a stage environment, we have a prod environment, and for each environment we have a different properties. So because let's say we have a database properties, we have a username and password. So since we have a different environment, we will have a different credentials for different environment database. So in that case, we need separate files, right? So if we are in the dev environment, we want to get the credential of the dev environment database. And if, similarly, if we are on the stage or in prod, we need to get the credential of the stage database and the prod database. So to make that differentiate that configuration, we have that at the rate profile annotation where you can define your all the properties in a different file, and based on the profile your server is running, it will pick the properties file from respective environment for respective files. So for that purpose it is used. And the next question is when we work with the JPA, right? Sometimes we need like we want to send some a specific set of data to the client, or we want only very specific data we want. So in that case there is a concept called projection. You can use that projection, and by using the projection concept you can just get the data of the specific set you want. So would you like to tell about projections, or have you used a projection anytime in your development?
Yeah, basically this projection concept come once in a my time. So actually, for example, we have hundreds of column. So as a client, that columns is unused for them. They don't need that can. That is like overburden for them. So we will just only show 5 to 10 columns. So for that purpose, projections come into the picture. So basically, we will achieve projection by making like DTO class. We can make it, or we can make it interface on interface. But which field we want to show, we will mention there, and we will while getting the data from the that we will map to that interface. So projection is very helpful as terms of business as well. So what have the main advantage of projection is like it is the one of the way to improve the database calls also, like improve the performance of our application. So instead of calling hundreds column, just we are calling 10 or 5 columns. So obviously our performance will get increased. So it is the way to increase the performance as well,
Yeah.
apart from security also. Yeah.
So yeah, you are right. Moving forwards, so let's now the another question which came to my mind is that we have a API written, right? So how the flow goes from when we get that request from the client, and client is like it can be a website or it can be a mobile, right? So there is a API written. So when any user hits that API, how the flow happens in the backend server, Can you please explain?
Yeah, so basically, whenever like client is get hit some API, so first that it is come under the controller. Controller like we have a controller class. From controller, it will get mapped like what kind of methods we are getting or what like according to the mapping that particular method is got called, and that mapping is go to the service class. From service class, it goes to the repository interface, and from repository interface, it's like anything's already there, then it will get written. Otherwise, it will collect the data from the database. And after that, the reverse cycle will come, and the whatever response we will get, it will get to the client. So this is the cycle.
Yeah, you are
So
right.
anything you want to add? Yeah.
Yes, I would like to add few points here as well. You whatever you have explained is that is correct, but on top of that, let's say we have a multiple controller in our project, right? So
Yes.
when
Yes.
any client hits any API, how do Spring Boot know like which controller this API is written,
Yes.
right? So in that case, how the flow happens is right. So when a client has hit any API, we have that API URL defined in our controller. So it comes to the front controller first. So in the front controller, there is a handler which says that which controller this API is written. So handler will take that decision and will redirect to that particular controller in your project where that API is defined. So that is one thing which I would like to add it for this. And next is like API is written. So how do we test that API in the backend server? Like what tool you use for testing purpose?
Yeah, for testing, there are different tools market in the market. Basically, the most tools many developer are using Postman. Postman is the tool that they are using. Rester is also tool. They are using Swagger is also there. We can test in Swagger also. Yeah, these are the tools we can use.
Yeah, you are right. So now let's move on to the some other set of questions. That is like more of how do we communicate, and that is needed from the microservices point of view. So let's say we have a two services and we want to communicate between two services. So how do we communicate, and like what concept do you use, or what you use for the communication between two microservices?
Yeah, so basically, before three Spring Boot 3, there is a REST template. So we used to call REST template. So there will be the REST call between the two services. But now REST template is got deprecated. So now we are using Fin client. There is a Open API, Fin client. From their library, we are getting Fin client. So after by using Fin client, we are mainly like communicating with two services.
Yeah, so there is another thing also by which you can communicate. It's called wave client.
Web client, yeah.
Yes, so wave client is a reactive way of communicating between the microservices. So either you can use fan client or wave client for the communication. So that is there. And uh, what is service discovery? Like,
Yeah.
what is the purpose of service discovery?
Like service discovery is the one of the like main architecture in our microservices. So service, whatever the services we have there, that is got registered there in service discovery. It's just like act as like a database of all the services. So and what are and instances of all the services. For example, I have for particular services there is a 10 instance for that services. The whole record will be there, and that service it will get stored by it's not by URL. It get stored by the service name. So it is just like a database of all the services that get stored there, so that any calls or anything is coming from the API or like we are routing things are there. So just it will search and it will route to the that service. So from service registry, like we are getting all the information.
Yes, you are right. On top of that, I would also like to add one point for which that service registry is used. Basically, it is a central server where we can see all the microservices registered as a client. So that is one thing, and it also helps in the communication between two services. So let's say we have a two microservices which is running on one port and other is running on other port, and to communicate between these microservices, if we hard code the URL, we will be able to communicate between the microservices. But let's say tomorrow my URL gets changed,
It changed.
so you will have to make the change in both the microservices, which will be a not maintainable code,
And that
like
is
it
just
will.
like a hard coding.
Yes,
Yeah.
so we have to change the code in both the microservices. But if we use service registry, right, so when a application register himself as a client in the service registry, we give application name to each of the service, so we can use that application name in communicating between two microservices, because that will not change. So even though after my URL or port number is changed in one of the microservices, we don't have to make a change in any of the microservices, because we are using that service registry to make that call between two services. It can be not two, it can be, let's say you have a one microservice that is being used in hundreds of microservices. So if
Mm.
you hard code that URL, you will have to make a change in all the 100 microservices. So that is a headache to change just because of your URL got changed or port got changed. So in that purpose also service discovery helps. So that is one thing which I would like to add here. And next question is, what is circuit breaker?
Yeah, circuit breaker is the design pattern that we are using in our microservices. The term consists of the circuit breaker. Like we have our electricity circuit is there. It's work like the same. Like whenever a circuit is flowing in our cable, that it will considered as a closed circuit. Whenever like circuit is get open, it should be considered as the open circuit. So basically, what's happened in our microservices, whenever one service is like down or it's getting long, like it is getting slow or it is response time is slow. So for that purpose, we use circuit breaker. So we don't want to cascade that problem to other services. So we stop the cascading problem. So for that purpose, circuit breaker come into the picture. So there is a fallback method. So instead of showing error, we will just show some dummy values. So it won't cascade our error to the other services. By
Yes, you
this
are
way, we
right.
can.
Yeah, you are completely right. This is used for like fallback mechanism, as you said, right? So let's say you have a service and that service is done. So in that case, you don't want to send the error message to the client. So
Mm.
you want like some other message needs to be sent, like meaningful message you want to send to the client, because when server is down, your API will not get hit and you will get that error, and that error will be sent back to the client. So we don't want that error to go back to the client. So for that purpose, we use circuit breaker pattern where we have a fallback mechanism basically. So when your service is done, it will call that fallback mechanism and it will send a custom response which we want to send to the client. So for that purpose it is used. And
Yes, yes, yes.
next we'll talk about like what is a API gateway in microservices architecture.
Yeah, so API gateways act like a front controller. So it will act like a mediator between our client and the backend services. So any services, any call will come, that will be the single point of entry for other services. So API it's basically help to routing our to the services. So first it will come to the our API, and API will decide which service they have to go. So they will route to the that service, and they are also act as a filter also for any service. Like, for example, we haven't set rate limiter to our API. So thousands or hundreds of the services like calls is coming at one per second. So that make our application down. So we will filter it out. So we just want 100 call per second. So it act as a filter also. So this is the main use of API gateway.
Yeah, you are right. And the next question is, what is config server in microservice architecture?
Yeah, so config server is just like we externalizing our configuration. So earlier, what happening we are whenever like anything we are doing, so we will have to redeploy our application. So just we will externalize our configuration file. So for that purpose, maintainability will be increased because we don't have to deploy our service again and again. So just with center repository will be there. From there, it will take the values and it will get executed.
Yes,
So
you are right. This is because of when we have a different or so many microservices in our application. So you will always find that some of the properties file is common to all of the
all the
microservices. So in that case, rather than writing those common configuration in all the microservices, what we can do is that we can externalize that uh, common properties to a config server, and from that config server we'll be picking up those configuration in all the microservices, so it becomes easier for us to maintain the code as well. Because if, let's say, we have some common properties and we have a hundreds of microservices, so if we change one properties, we have to change in all the 100 microservices, so that is not easy to maintain the code. So for that purpose we use config server, where we externalize all the common properties to a separate service. So in case if you want to change anything, we will just change in the config server and it will get reflected in all the microservices. So for that purpose we use spring server, like config server. So I think we have covered so many questions, guys, here related to Spring Boot applications. We tried to discuss all the questions which are like more relevant from the interview point of view, and these can be asked in the interview. So it might be helpful if you are preparing for the Spring Boot interview questions. In case if you find that we have not covered any questions, or if you want to add anything to our discussion as an answer, you can definitely
comment.
let us know on the comment section. We'll be happy to know. Thank you for watching. We'll see in the next video. So bye bye.